Chapter 1. The Vision in the Cauldron. In the sanctum of crimson stone and shadowed flame, deep within the heart of the Temple of Cain, the air pulsed with the scent of iron and incense. Torches hissed against damp stone walls, their flames casting jagged shadows that danced like wraiths across murals of butchery and divine ecstasy. At the center of the sanctum stood the cauldron of blood, an ancient relic of obsidian and bone, its blackened rim crusted with ages of sacrifice. From its depths rose steam, tinted a deep, visceral red, as though the bowl itself were exhaling the breath of slaughter. Xyrissa the Veiled stood before it, draped in layered robes of flayed skin dyed black with blood, her gaunt frame hunched yet exuding undeniable power. Her face was concealed behind a silver death mask, shaped like a screaming maiden, the eyes hollow voids that mirrored nothing. Beneath the mask, her own eyes were glazed with fervor, her cracked lips mumbling guttural chants in the language of death. Around her, witch elves swayed in ecstatic trance, their pale bodies painted with glyphs, their hands slick with fresh arterial red. Their blades had not yet dried from the morning's offering, a trio of corsair captives whose entrails now adorned the altar like garlands. Xyrissa lifted her ceremonial dagger, the blade a shard of pure obsidian, humming with ancestral rage. She drew it across her palm, slowly, precisely, blood blooming from her ancient skin in thick, dark rivulets. She turned her hand and let the blood drip into the cauldron. The moment her blood touched the surface, the air screamed. Not audibly, no. It was deeper, a psychic shriek that tore through the minds of all present. The witch elves dropped to their knees, shrieking, convulsing in pain or rapture or both. Xyrissa did not move. She had heard the whisper of Cain before, had bled for it 1,000 times, but this was different. The blood began to boil violently, not from heat, but from something deeper, some force beneath. Crimson steam coiled upward, thickening into unnatural fog, blotting out torchlight and plunging the sanctum into a dim, throbbing red. Then she saw it. Not with her eyes, but within. Her soul was wrenched from her body, spiraling downward, pulled through a vortex of screaming faces and flailing limbs, through shadows that clung and gnashed and whispered secrets in forgotten tongues. She landed upon the high towers of Nagrivhar, but they were crumbling. Black ichor rained from the sky like molten night, coating everything in its path. The sky itself had ruptured. A jagged wound across the firmament poured forth tendrils of darkness that slithered like living things. Spires split and twisted, melting like wax under unseen heat. The air was choked with cries, the shrill death howls of witch elves flayed alive by shadowy claws that needed no substance to rend flesh from bone. Xyrissa turned and saw herself. A twisted mirror, a figure robed in her same veil and mask, standing atop the grand cauldron of blood now broken in half. The reflection raised its hand. The mask cracked, and within was not her face, but a void of teeth and tongues, writhing in eternal hunger. From the abyss beneath the temple, a massive shape surged forth, a formless titan of eyes and mouths and black wings, tearing through stone and faith alike. It devoured the screaming and drank the prayers before they could be answered. It had no name, yet its presence clawed into her mind. The Devourer Below. Reality fractured. Xyrissa's body jolted backward from the cauldron, slamming against the temple wall with a wet crack. Blood dribbled from her nose, from her ears, from beneath the silver mask. She gasped, and with that breath came pain, deep and mortal, as though the vision had cut her lungs with obsidian fingers. Around her the witch elves moaned and twitched, the most fervent of them now blind, their eyes burst within their skulls. One clawed at her face, whispering about worms in the blood, before she collapsed, her back arching unnaturally. Xyrissa crawled to her knees, her hands slipping in blood, hers and others. She stared into the cauldron, now silent, its surface smooth and calm as obsidian glass. But deep within she saw a final image flicker. The gates of Nagrivhar wrenched open from within. And from the darkness her people marched out, eyes black and vacant, their mouths whispering only one word. Hunger. Xyrissa screamed. Not for pain, not for madness, but for the truth she now carried like a poison in her veins. Cain had not spoken. Something else had. And it was coming. Chapter 2. Shadows Beneath the Spires. The obsidian towers of Nagrivhar pierced the sky like talons grasping for a dying sun. Veiled in eternal twilight and framed by jagged peaks, the city crouched upon the black cliffs of northern Nagrivhar like a serpent coiled in shadow. Its streets were slick with old blood and lined with statues of flayed martyrs and weeping maidens cast in iron. Here, cruelty was art and suffering a prayer. Within the highest tower of the Temple of Cain, Xyrissa the Veiled sat upon her bone-carved throne, motionless as a corpse, her fingers laced, her mask unreadable. Yet beneath the cold metal of her visage, her ancient eyes twitched with unrest. The vision from the cauldron gnawed at her like a worm in the mind, a rot behind the eyes. Every detail had seared itself into her soul, the sky rupturing like flesh, the towers twisting, her reflection unmasked and filled with void. Her blood still burned with its echo. She had told no one. Not the other Hag Queens, not her acolytes, not even the high seers who watched entrails like stars. To reveal weakness was to invite blades. And in the court of Hag Queens, a trembling hand often ended severed. But silence brought no peace. Signs began to multiply, subtle at first, then unmistakable. At the temple's edge, where the ritual beasts were kept, the sawkill, twisted hounds bred in the pits beneath the temple, refused their meat. They paced in tight, fevered circles, tails rigid, their glowing red eyes rolling back until only the whites remained. When one acolyte dared to approach, it snapped its chain and tore out her throat in a fountain of arterial red, then collapsed convulsing, vomiting black bile that hissed like acid. The blood of sacrifices, once hot and eager to boil in the cauldron's embrace, now steamed sluggishly. During rites, it congealed too quickly, forming unnatural symbols along the basin's edge, shapes that seemed to twitch when stared at too long. The whispers came next. In the stone halls, in the chambers where torture was hymn and blades were sacraments, came murmurs that were not the voice of any priestess. They slithered from cracks in the walls, from unlit corners, from behind statues of Cain with his sword raised in endless slaughter. They whispered in languages none could name, voices like glass grinding on bone, or children choking on dust. One night, Xyrissa walked the hall of shrines alone, her blade ready, the shadows pressing in too tightly. She stopped before the oldest idol, Cain as the Devourer, cloaked in ebon wings, his face a skull dripping with blood. There she heard it again, a whisper, soft, feminine but not alive. "We see you, Queen of Veils. We know what you saw." Xyrissa spun, blade flashing. Nothing, but the shadows along the walls shifted as if drawing back. Laughing, she returned to her chambers drenched in sweat, more exhausted than she'd ever been after a blood fast. Even her dreams turned foul. She walked through the temple as it burned, stepped over screaming sisters, her feet bare, soaked in boiling gore. She reached the cauldron only to find it empty, not dry but hollow, as if it had never held blood, never held meaning. And behind her, a voice like 1,000 tongues spoke a single word, stretched until it broke. Feast. The next day, a sister of the outer hall was found flayed, not with knives but with hands, her flesh peeled neatly from her body, folded like offerings around a black stone idol. Her face was left intact and placed on her chest, mouth open in silent prayer. No one had heard screams, no locks were broken, no footsteps found. The temple murmured of chaos, of betrayal, of forbidden rites. Xyrissa said nothing, but she watched. The blood betrayed them. One afternoon, during a public offering, the cauldron failed. A virgin, her body honed by years of ecstatic slaughter, was cast in. Her neck was opened cleanly, and her blood poured out, but the moment it hit the cauldron it hissed and froze, not in ice but in solid crystal, red as rubies and harder than steel. The priestess who performed the rite collapsed, vomiting blood and teeth, her eyes bleeding rivers of ink. The audience, witch-elves, corsairs, nobles in armor, fled in silent dread. Not a scream passed their lips. Only the sound of boots on stone, retreating from something no one dared to name. Xyrissa stood alone before the cauldron after they had gone. She dipped a finger into the blood crystal. It was warm. It pulsed once. And in that pulse she saw again the towers of Nagrivhar, this time not falling but rising wrong, twisting like bones healed badly. Faces bloomed in the stone, mouths open in perpetual scream. Her hand recoiled. She turned, robes rustling like dead leaves, and walked toward her hidden chamber, deep beneath the temple, where even light feared to enter. The city was changing. The signs were not metaphor. They were warnings, and warnings she knew were not given, they were gifted, by something that wanted her to understand before the end came. She would not tell the others, not yet. But Xyrissa the Veiled began to prepare, and she prayed, not to Cain, not any more, but to whatever watched her from the black between the stars. It had spoken once, and it would speak again. Chapter 3. The Doubt of Devotion. The grand chapel of Nagrivhar's inner sanctum was silent, save for the soft drip of blood from the ceiling. It landed with rhythmic plops upon the stone floor, an eternal offering from the flayed skins strung high above, their stretched forms wafting slowly in the fetid air. Candlelight danced across the faces of the carved gods. Cain, in his many aspects, the lord of murder, the bloody-handed, the ravager of souls. Xyrissa knelt alone beneath his greatest statue, the one known as the unblinking wrath. It towered over her, carved from volcanic rock, its face hidden beneath a crown of severed hands. Its fingers were talons, outstretched as if reaching to tear apart the faithful. At its feet, pools of congealed blood steamed softly in braziers of black iron. The air was thick with the scent of burnt marrow and dried entrails. She did not chant. She did not offer blood. She only stared. Her veil was soaked in sweat. Beneath the mask her breath came shallow, uneven. The silence of the temple mocked her, her mind a battlefield between the sacred and the profane. For centuries she had served without question. She had killed and sacrificed and guided her sisters to do the same. Every drop spilled had been for him. Every scream coaxed from a writhing throat had been a hymn. But now every sacred rite felt empty. The vision had lodged itself in her soul like a barbed spear. Each time she closed her eyes, it twisted deeper. What she had seen in the cauldron, was it truly Cain? The god of murder did not show mercy, but neither did he lie. His will was direct, visceral, understood through steel and death. But this thing that had spoken through the cauldron's steam, that had whispered in the blood and shadows, it had not demanded a sacrifice. It had warned her. Cain did not warn, and that single thought, that subtle, treacherous thread, unwound something ancient within her. She reached into the folds of her robes and drew a thin dagger. Its hilt was made of spinal bone, its edge forever wet with the blood of innocence. The blade of confession. With a swift motion she pressed it to her own throat and drew a line, not deep, not mortal, but enough to feed the altar. Enough to listen. Blood ran in thin rivulets down her chest, slipping into the grooves of her armor, dripping onto the black stone floor. She fell into chant, lips quivering, voice barely above a whisper. "Cain, my lord, my blade, my reason." The shadows around the statue thickened. She bowed until her forehead touched the blood-slick floor. "I have seen a truth I do not understand. I bleed now not to command, but to be judged. Was it your hand that showed me the Devourer? Was it your voice in the depths? Or—" She stopped. Even saying the words threatened her soul. "Or has another stolen your altar?" The silence in the chapel broke with a low, reverberating thump, as though a giant had struck the earth below. A moment later, blood erupted from the idol's mouth, not in a graceful stream, but in a geyser, thick and laced with chunks of bone and ash. It poured down the statue's face, across its chest, soaking the floor with unnatural speed. Xyrissa scrambled back, her blade raised defensively, her heart thundering in her chest. From within the flood of gore came a voice. But not one. Men layered atop each other, some high and weeping, others deep and wet with rot. They spoke not in words, but in meanings, a pressure against her skull, thoughts forced into her mind. Faith lies in the cut, but devotion rots with stillness. We are not Cain, yet we were before him, beneath him, behind him. You saw, you know, the mask cracks. Xyrissa screamed and hurled the dagger at the statue. It struck the forehead of the idol and stuck, vibrating violently as though it had pierced something alive. The blood stopped. The voice vanished. Silence returned, save for her own harsh breathing. She was not alone. Not anymore. The others would call it madness, the other Hag Queens would skin her for even whispering of it. Devotion was demanded, not debated. And doubt? Doubt was a crack in the temple's stone, one that could never be allowed to widen. She crawled toward the idol and tore the dagger free. The stone wept beneath it, thin lines of crimson trickling like tears. She no longer knew if she served a god or a memory of one. No longer knew if her sacrifices fed power or simply fed something. The foundation of her world, of her belief, shifted beneath her feet, and she knew then that devotion, once doubted, could never truly be reclaimed. Not in Nagrivhar, not among the Druchi, not in a temple where shadows whispered louder than gods. Chapter 4. The Assassin's Question. Night in Nagrivhar was a deeper thing than the simple absence of light. It was thick, tangible, a velvet sheath of darkness that wrapped around the city's spires like a lover's grip. Even torchlight seemed to cower, flickering weakly behind iron grates and crimson-dyed curtains. The upper halls of the Temple of Cain stood eerily still, high above the blood altars, where the veil between this world and nightmare grew thin. Xyrissa's private sanctum, carved directly into the mountain's black heart, was deathly quiet. No guards were permitted near her chambers. The faithless did not deserve to witness what transpired within. Here, surrounded by relics of past glories and ancient sacrifices, she knelt at a basin of rusted silver, hands submerged in chilled blood. She was divining, or trying to, seeking patterns in the viscera of a disemboweled hare offered hours earlier, but the shapes refused to make sense. The entrails floated lazily, dead and mute, and for once she found herself afraid to look deeper. Then it came. The soundless step. The breath that did not disturb the air. The presence, felt rather than heard. She did not turn. "I felt your coming like a needle in my spine," she said, her voice calm, unfaltering. The assassin stepped from the shadows with the confidence of a god or a ghost. His armor was the color of wet slate, designed to reflect nothing. His cloak dripped shadow, blending him into the room as though he were smoke given form. His face, half covered by a mesh veil, revealed only pale, sharp cheekbones and a mouth set in a permanent scowl. He held no visible weapon, but Xyrissa could smell the steel on him, cold, clean, hungering. "You are Xyrissa the Veiled," he said. His voice was like crushed silk, smooth but heavy with menace. "The serpent of Nagrivhar." "I was that," she replied. "I may still be, depending on your next movement." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You are not what I expected. The others said you'd gone mad, that you speak to shadows now." She stood slowly, robes whispering around her feet, blood still dripping from her pale fingers. "And which others sent you?" "Assassin. Hag Queen," he replied without hesitation. "She believes you've been corrupted, that your visions are a symptom of chaos, poison in your soul. She sent me to end your suffering." He took a step forward. Xyrissa did not flinch. "I do not suffer," she said softly. "I know. I've seen truths that your mistress dares not dream, and I wonder, Shadow Creeper, have you seen them too?" For the briefest moment, his stance faltered. She smiled beneath her mask. "Tell me," she whispered, stepping toward him. "When did the shadows start whispering to you, Veileth?" His name struck him like a blade. He tensed, lips pulling back in a snarl, but his hand stayed at his side, not reaching for a dagger. "Not yet." "You have heard them," she said. "That's why you hesitated, why you didn't slit my throat the moment you arrived." Silence stretched long between them, broken only by the soft drip of blood from the basin. Then he spoke. "3 nights ago I walked through the corpse hall of Tower 4, he said. "I had just claimed the life of a noble. There was no one there but the dead, and yet something laughed. Not aloud, not in the air, in my skull." He took another step forward, his voice tight. "Then I saw a child, carved from blood and shadow. It spoke my name in my mother's voice. I ran." Xyrissa exhaled, as if in relief. "You've seen the edge," she murmured. "You've felt it fray. The gods are not who they once were, assassin. Something is stirring in the marrow of the world." Veileth's eyes narrowed. "You could be mad," he said. "I could be dead," she answered, "but I am not. Neither are you." He hesitated. For a moment war bloomed behind his eyes. Then, like a dancer flipping from one stance to another, he flicked his wrist, and a curved blade gleamed in his hand. Xyrissa did not move. She let the steel touch the edge of her throat. "I should end you," he said. "I was promised favor, rank, gold. If I bring them your head, I am reborn in Morthira's favor." She leaned forward into the blade until it bit skin, until a droplet of blood slid down its curve. "And if you kill me," she said, her voice quiet but unshaken, "you silence the one person who can make sense of the nightmares hunting your sleep." The blade remained. A heartbeat passed. "Phew." Then, tch-tch. He pulled the blade away. "I should never have hesitated," he muttered. "But hesitation is a lesson." Xyrissa lifted her hand, pressed her bleeding finger to her silver mask, and marked a smear of crimson across it. "Then learn it well, Veileth of the Hollow Veil, for you now walk a path that has no return." He sheathed his blade in a whisper. "Then we walk it together," he said. For the first time in weeks, Xyrissa laughed. It was not kind. "An assassin and a heretic," she said. "The perfect pair for a dying god's funeral." They turned from the altar together. The temple did not tremble, but something in the stone watched them go. Chapter 5. Blood Oracle. The temple of Cain bled with silence as the deepest hour of night fell like a shroud. All light had fled the upper halls, and only the lowest sanctum still stirred, where even the witch-elves feared to tread. and the walls were carved not by mortal hand, but by the caress of old, slow hatred. Xyrissa and Velith descended into the forbidden vaults beneath the temple, deeper than even the sacrificial pits. The stairs spiraled like a drill into the roots of the mountain, each step marked with glyphs etched in blood-hardened script, warnings written in languages older than Ulthuan. They descended in silence, the only sound the rasp of Xyrissa's breath behind her silver mask and the whisper of Velith's cloak as it brushed against ancient stone. At the lowest point, beyond a gate of fused bone and rusted iron, lay the Hall of Veins. Here the ceiling pulsed. Living flesh clung to the stone like a parasite, twitching faintly with each throb. Veins as thick as rope ran through the chamber, pulsing with some ancient ichor, black-red and glistening. At the room's center sat an altar not of stone but of meat and gristle, a heart-shaped thing that twitched at their approach. "This is blasphemy," Velith muttered, unable to stop himself. "Good," Xyrissa replied, stepping forward. "Only in blasphemy can we glimpse the truth." She shrugged off her outer robes, revealing her full regalia, flayed skin vestments adorned with talismans of bone and teeth, and an intricate headdress made from the scalps of executed seers. She approached the living altar and withdrew a long, serrated blade, a dagger crafted not of metal but of crystallized blood from the cauldron itself. Forbidden and hoarded through centuries, Xyrissa did not hesitate. She dragged the blade across both of her forearms, from wrist to elbow, deep and slow, letting the blood pour freely. It spilled onto the altar, sizzling as it touched the twitching flesh. The thing shuddered, as if awakened, and its surface began to change, folds opening like lips, runes blooming in wet red, unreadable. She dropped to her knees, arms outstretched, blood pooling around her. "Cain, or whatever remains of you," she whispered hoarsely, "I give you this offering, my blood, my mind, my soul, if it pleases. Show me the truth. Strip me of lies. Let me see what festers beneath." The altar convulsed. Then it reached. Tendons unfurled from the heart meat, wrapping around her wrists, slithering up her arms. Her mouth opened in a scream, but no sound escaped. The tendrils yanked her forward, slamming her head against the altar. The world split. She stood in an endless cavern of bone and fire. The ceiling writhed with shadows that had eyes, thousands of them blinking in unison. The ground cracked beneath her, not stone, but skulls, and from their hollow mouths poured a single, unified breath. The Devourer Below. A shadow, larger than any temple, any god, rose from the chasm. It had no true form. Its limbs melted and reformed, made of flesh, smoke, and tongues. It moved like hunger given shape, dragging itself forward on a tide of despair. Her vision was torn from the beast and hurled skyward, far over mountains, twisted into leering faces, valleys that screamed. She plummeted into a fissure in the earth, the hollow of the screaming earth, a place forgotten by time, where the land wept blood and no sun ever shone. An ancient vault lay buried there, sealed with chains of gold and sin, pulsing, waiting, humming with the name of what slumbered beneath. Devourer, devourer. Then came the faces. Her own, hundreds of them, each wearing a different mask, each sobbing or laughing or screaming, all whispering. You were chosen not to worship, but to warn. Xyrissa awoke with a strangled gasp, back in the Hall of Veins. Blood soaked the altar, the floor, her legs. The tendrils had vanished. Her wounds still bled, but she felt no pain. Her arms trembled, her veins alight with fire. Velith stood above her, blade drawn, watching the room with wide, bloodshot eyes. "What did you see?" he demanded. Xyrissa's mouth opened, her voice barely a breath. "The Devourer Below, a hunger without end. and a place the hollow of the screaming earth. That's where it begins. Valeth's jaw clenched. And ends? She looked up at him, eyes alight with something far beyond madness now, certainty. No, she whispered. There is no end. She staggered to her feet. The altar behind her twitched once more and then fell still, its meat drying, shriveling, returning to silence. But something had heard her. Something had listened, and now it knew her name. Chapter 6. The Court of Blades. The Court of Blades was no place for mercy. It perched like a cancerous jewel atop the central ziggurat of Nagrivhar, its obsidian spires clawing into the storm-heavy sky, catching each lightning strike like offerings to the bloody-handed god. No windows graced its walls, only arrow slits and murder holes. The air that crept through its bone-laced corridors was fetid with incense, old blood, and scorched flesh. This was not a temple for prayer. It was a court for judgment, manipulation, and the quiet, surgical slaughter of the unworthy. Xyrissa walked the corridor alone, flanked by statues of flayed saints and impaled heretics. Each of their faces had been left intact, mouths open in permanent screams, a reminder of what awaited those who faltered. Her own mask reflected them as she passed, the mirrored silver eyes seeing nothing, revealing less. She carried no blade. Weapons were not permitted in the presence of High Priestess Velhar, not because she feared them, but because no one left alive had ever succeeded in drawing steel against her. The great hall loomed ahead. Rows of dark-robed sisters lined the chamber, their lips sewn shut, hands gloved in barbed chainmail. They were Velhar's personal attendants, not permitted to speak, not even to scream when punished. Above them, impaled on hooks from the ceiling, hung the failed Hag Queens, skeletal but preserved by dark rites, their twisted spines bent into grotesque arches like mournful chandeliers. Xyrissa's entrance was silent, yet every eye beneath every veil followed her. At the far end sat Velhar, draped across a throne carved from the fused bones of temple traitors. Her robes were blackened gold, woven with hair and sinew. Her face was uncovered, a rare honor, and it was beautiful, in the way a dagger is beautiful. Sharp, gleaming, and meant for one purpose, her eyes were twin voids, bottomless pits of contempt and calculation. Beside her stood a towering executioner in silent vigil, his blade as tall as a man and etched with the names of every priestess it had ever beheaded. Xyrissa, Veil purred, not rising. Her voice was velvet soaked in venom. You honor us by stepping down from your tower of whispering shadows. What calls you from such rarefied heights? Xyrissa bowed low, letting the long ends of her veil brush the floor. She straightened slowly, composed as a statue, even as her heart beat like war drums beneath her ribs. I bring tribute, she said, and news from the eastern blood-wardens. A fresh vein of sacrificial flesh has been unearthed in the Ravenspine tunnels. Slaves with no tongue, no memory, and dreams full of screams. Perfect for the cauldron. Velhor's lip curled in amusement. News, yes. Tribute. She leaned forward slightly. You've grown bold, Xyrissa. I expected you to bring severed heads, not speak with such honeyed tongue. I offer both, if the court wills it. A snap of Velhar's fingers. Two of the mute attendants emerged, dragging a sack of tanned skin between them. They upended it on the floor, spilling forth a collection of heads, corsairs, warlocks, one noble's daughter known to have mocked Cain's rights. Villa smiled. Your faith remains vigorous. But, her eyes narrowed, and yet you've been absent, withdrawn. Your sisters whisper that your tower grows cold, that your rites are subdued. Have the visions dulled, Veiled One? Xyrissa's mind raced. Each word was a step on a blade. Any hesitation, any misstep would end with her intestines used as altar garlands. She took a breath and let her voice harden. "The blood has grown strange," she said truthfully. "Not silent, not still, but strange. The cauldron bubbles black more often than red. The shadows twitch too long after light departs. I have seen signs." Velar's gaze sharpened. The court fell utterly still. "Signs," she said, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "And you haven't reported them." "To interpret is to risk blasphemy," Xyrissa replied smoothly. "Better silence than misreading the will of Cain. But I have not been idle." She stepped forward, carefully pulling a scroll from within her robes. "I have sent spies to the hollow reaches. There is movement among the forgotten cults. Something stirs, and I believe they seek to corrupt the faith." Velar said nothing for a moment. Her expression was unreadable. Then, slowly, she gestured for one of her attendants to take the scroll. "You speak carefully, Xyrissa," she murmured, "almost as if you fear what you might reveal." Xyrissa bowed again, letting the words wash over her like a flensing blade. "I fear nothing, High One. I am Cain's daughter. Let him judge my blood." The priestess's gaze lingered for a long, suffocating moment. Then she laughed. A ripple of dark amusement spread through the court like rot through meat. Velar leaned back, relaxed. "Very well," she said. "You will oversee the culling of the hollow reaches. Take 2 blade stissers and one of the executioners. Root out this corruption and bring me its heart." Xyrissa bowed again. "It will be done." As she turned to leave, Velhar's voice followed her, silken but heavy with threat. "And Xyrissa, should your visions prove personal rather than prophetic, the court shall need new chandeliers." The chamber echoed with the muted creak of the hanging corpses swaying above. Xyrissa walked back into the gloom, her spine rigid, her breath shallow. Behind her, the court resumed its whispers, its silent conspiracies, its gentle orchestration of demise. She had survived, for now. But the blade was closer than ever. And it hung not only over her, but over all of Nagrivhar. Chapter 7. The Road to the Hollow. The gates of Nagrivhar opened with a groan like a dying leviathan. Rusted chains strained against the weight of ancient iron as Xyrissa led her procession into the wastelands beyond the city. Behind her trailed 13 Sisters of the Bleeding Veil, fanatics who had given up names, memories, and even tongues to serve her cause. Their faces were masked in flayed skin, their bodies robed in black and crimson, each armed with twin blades consecrated in the blood of executed nobles. At the rear, silent and tireless, strode Valeth. The assassin had shed his noble finery for the muted garb of war, segmented leather armor laced with poisons, his face now fully masked in a void black veil. He carried no banner, bore no symbol, but his presence was as sharp as a dagger drawn in a lover's bed. The land they entered was a graveyard of forgotten gods. The further they traveled from Nagrivhar, the more reality bent. The once familiar obsidian roads crumbled beneath their boots, giving way to glassy wastelands, fields of cracked bone that whispered underfoot. Great winged carrion birds circled overhead, beaks caked in old gore, eyes too human in their cunning. The hollow of the screaming earth was far, buried deep within the blackened spine, a region marked on no official map, known only to madmen and heretics. A place where the land mourned, not in metaphor but in sound. Even now, in the far-off distance, a low, endless moan seemed to rise from the cracked ground itself, a ceaseless exhale of agony. On the 3rd night, they camped beneath the jagged ribs of an ancient beast long dead, perhaps a dragon, perhaps something fouler. The ribs formed a half-arch over their makeshift camp, and the sisters painted glyphs in blood along the bone to keep the night spirits at bay. It did not work. The first attack came in the dark as the stars blinked out one by one. They came not with howls, but with laughter, wet, bubbling, mad. Twisted silhouettes crawled from the fissures, beasts once men, now reformed by chaos. Flesh bloomed where it should not, mouths opened across their bellies, their backs, even their palms. Their eyes wept tar, and their limbs moved in spasms, as if remembering how to walk with each step. The sisters did not scream. They surged forward as one, blades flashing, chants bubbling from ruined throats. Steel met sinew in a symphony of slaughter. Xyrissa moved through the chaos like a wraith, her curved daggers singing with each strike. One of the beasts lunged at her, its neck a mass of serpents, its chest split open to reveal a fetus with too many arms. She plunged her blade into its eye socket, tore downward, then drove the second blade into the shrieking thing within its chest. Blood sprayed in ribbons. The stench of rot and burning hair filled the air. Velith moved like smoke, appearing, killing, vanishing. He danced between the monstrosities, his daggers painting crimson arcs across their warped bodies. At one point, a hulking brute, 3 heads gnashing atop a body of muscle and bone, grabbed him by the leg and swung him like a rag doll into the ground. Velith's ribs cracked audibly, but he responded by plunging both daggers into the creature's neck and twisting. The heads thrashed violently, blood gushing from torn arteries before it collapsed, twitching. By dawn, the battlefield was quiet, not with peace, but with death. 9 sisters stood. 4 lay butchered, their limbs scattered across the sand. Xyrissa knelt beside one of them, a girl barely 20, her mask shattered, her face a ruin of broken teeth and crushed bone. She placed a single coin of obsidian on the girl's tongue, then whispered a prayer not to Cain, but to whatever watched from below. "Another sacrifice," she murmured. "Let it be enough." Velith limped beside her, blood soaking his hip, a deep cut seeping beneath his armor. "They were waiting for us," he said. "They knew we were coming." "Chaos knows all roads," Xyrissa replied, "but few are brave enough to walk them." The next days blurred into blood and ash. They passed through abandoned villages, each marked by the same sigil, a hand inverted, fingers splayed, etched into walls with fingernails and worse. Bodies hung from trees, their stomachs opened, entrails used to write messages in languages no living thing should understand. Some still moved. One woman had been nailed to a shrine, her eyelids torn off, her womb stuffed with live rats. She wept blood and whispered prayers to a mother she'd never had. The sisters gave her a merciful death. Xyrissa said nothing, but her fingers trembled beneath her gloves. Finally they reached the edge of the hollow. The earth dropped away suddenly into a vast, yawning chasm, a wound in the land miles wide. No birds circled here, no winds blew. The sky itself seemed distant, and the moaning of the earth grew louder, rising in pitch, growing into a choir of screams, a ceaseless howling dirge that never paused, never relented. The hollow of the screaming earth. Xyrissa stared into it and saw nothing, and everything. Shapes moved in the dark. Not creatures. Thoughts. Waiting. Hearing. Hunger given form. She turned to her companions, her voice steady now. "We go down. There is no other path." Velith said nothing. The sisters chanted, and together they began their descent into madness. Chapter 8. Beneath Screaming Earth. The descent into the hollow of the screaming earth was like slipping down the throat of a god that had forgotten mercy. The walls of the chasm rose jagged and uneven, carved not by water or time, but by agony. Veins of red crystal pulsed within the black stone, throbbing like arteries beneath translucent skin. With every step downward, the screams grew louder, not of any living thing, but of the land itself. The very rock groaning with buried torment. It was a ceaseless, maddening sound, a cacophony of wails stretched across eternity, rising and falling like the breath of something imprisoned in the core of the world. The sisters descended in silence, their blades drawn, faces impassive beneath their masks of stretched leather and bronze. They moved like a mourning procession, their crimson robes fluttering in the stale, warm wind that rose from below. Valeth led them through the twisting paths, his cloak billowing behind him, blades held tight in blood-stained hands. His steps were steady, but his eyes never stopped moving. Xyrissa followed at the center, one hand on her dagger, the other clutching a shard of blackstone etched with runes she no longer dared to read. Her breath came slow and steady, but each inhale carried the taste of sulfur and rot. After hours of descent, perhaps days, for time lost all meaning, the chasm opened into a vast subterranean expanse. They had reached the vault. It lay embedded in the stone like a cancerous growth, a structure of ivory and dark jade, elegant in its ancient symmetry, yet warped with age and malice. Great arches rose above them, carved in the style of old Ulthuan, smooth spiraled lines that once spoke of grace and eternity, now cracked and bleeding with dark resin. Statues flanked the entrance, elven figures with noble faces, each one impaled through the chest by their own weapons, mouths agape in silent, eternal screams. Blood sealed the gate. It shimmered across the stone like a living membrane, translucent yet deep, a barrier woven from sacrificial rites older than the sundering. Symbols etched into it pulsed with dim crimson light, shifting subtly, as if aware of their presence. Xyrissa approached, and the membrane quivered. Valeth stepped forward, blade raised. "We'll cut through." "No," she said, "it must be fed." She raised her hand, slicing her palm with the curved edge of her dagger. Blood dripped onto the barrier. It sizzled, then was absorbed. The blood membrane writhed and pulled back like muscle peeling from bone. A wet squelch echoed through the cavern as the entrance opened, revealing a corridor of polished obsidian and green-glowing runes that pulsed in rhythm with unseen heartbeats. Inside, the air was different. Not stale, but pressurized, as though they had stepped into the lungs of something vast and dormant. Every breath was thick with power, old and venomous. The corridor led into a circular chamber. Runes spiraled across every surface, walls, ceiling, even the floor, forming a vortex of language meant to trap minds and twist meaning. At the center stood a raised dais of bleached bone, and atop it, a prison. It was not a cage in the traditional sense, but a weave of floating glyphs, arcs of chained light and spinning wards. Suspended within it was a thing, the demon. Its shape defied reason, fluid and ever-shifting. One moment a shriveled child, the next a towering figure cloaked in wings of shadow. Its face flickered between 1,000 expressions, ecstasy, agony, laughter, sorrow, none of them meant for mortal eyes. Its eyes, when they aligned with reality, were bottomless pits of white fire. It saw them, and it smiled. "Ah," it whispered, its voice entering their minds like a lover's breath laced with razors. "So the bloodline endures. The witches of ash and bone, little gnats buzzing near the vault of truth." Xyrissa approached cautiously, every muscle in her body screaming to flee. "You are bound," she said. The thing turned, its limbs cracking like branches. "I am delayed, not bound. The chains are weakening, just as prophecy said." One of the sisters stepped too close, too curious. In a blur of motion, the demon reached through the wards. A tendril of shadow pierced her mask, drilled through her skull. She spasmed once, then stood upright, still living, but empty. Her body turned, eyes vacant. In 1,000 voices she spoke. The Devourer below wakes, the veil cracks, the hollow sings, and the gods turn away. Xyrissa trembled, not from fear but recognition. These were the words from her visions. This was the prophecy. "What must we do?" she asked. The demon grinned wider. The sister's mouth stretched too far, skin splitting. "You are the wound. You are the key. You will either bleed the gate shut or open it with your scream." Then the sister's head burst, a geyser of brain and bone spraying across the room. Her body collapsed, twitching. The demon laughed, a sound that shattered the silence of the hollow. Xyrissa turned away, eyes burning. There was no salvation here, only a choice, and either path led to blood. Chapter 9. The Devourer Stirs. The vault trembled, not with sound, but with pressure, an invisible weight that pressed against every rib, every organ, every thought. The breath in Xyrissa's lungs turned heavy, each inhale thick with sulfur and iron. The glyphs along the chamber walls flared like open wounds, casting flickering green light across the faces of the sisters who remained. They stood still, blades in hand, yet utterly silent, not in discipline, but in dread. At the center, the daemon laughed. It swirled inside its cage of runes, its form now a sinuous serpent of black glass and fire, now a writhing mass of teeth sewn into the shape of a woman. Its smile never changed, predatory, indulgent, knowing. "You feel it," it crooned, voice slipping between their minds like an oil-slicked blade. "Don't you? The breath of the thing beneath. Its hunger bleeding into the stone. Faith rots, and the gate weakens." Xyrissa stepped closer, blood still crusting her arms from the offering that opened the vault. Her eyes were fever-bright behind the silver mask, her lips dry. "You were sealed by elves," she said, "before Nagrivhar, before the Druki walked this land." The demon laughed again, a sound that echoed not from its mouth, but from every surface in the chamber. "Not sealed, buried, entombed like poison. The elven mages who dared not name me, fools with starfire and fear, they tore this mountain apart to dig the prison, bled their firstborns dry to forge the wards. They knew the truth. Too late." The runes around its prison pulsed erratically, flickering between stability and collapse. Valeth stepped forward, his daggers drawn, eyes scanning the symbols as if seeking a weakness. Xyrissa raised a hand. Why did they do it? What did they fear? The demon's form twisted again, its limbs forming elegant elven features, a cruel parody of the highborn. They feared it, the one that stirs even now. The chamber dimmed, the walls seeming to stretch and breathe as the demon's presence deepened. "The Devourer Below," it whispered. Xyrissa felt the name like a nail hammered into her mind. The sisters around her flinched. One dropped to her knees, vomiting blood. "A god?" she asked, though she already knew. The demon's smile widened. "No, gods have shape, purpose, identity. The Devourer is hunger incarnate. It does not speak. It does not offer gifts. It does not demand temples. It drinks belief, eats worship, gorges on faith like marrow from a shattered bone. Its eyes, searing holes of white, locked onto her. And Cain, your precious lord of murder, he is meat to it. Already fading, already hollow. The room seemed to shrink. The walls wept blood. From somewhere deep in the vault, a vibration began, a slow, rhythmic thrum, like the heartbeat of a dying world. The demon turned its many faces to the ceiling, exultant. It wakes. Beneath this earth, it stirs, not yet whole, not yet free, but it feels the cracks in the veil, the fractures in the faith. Your prayers falter, your altars grow cold, and with each dying breath of belief, it grows stronger. One of the sisters screamed suddenly, slashing her own throat open in a frenzy of despair. Her blood sprayed in violent arcs across the floor, and she fell twitching to the ground. From her mouth, a voice emerged, not hers, not the daemon's, something else. So hungry, so near. Feed me, feed me, feed me. The body convulsed once more, then lay still. Xyrissa turned away, bile rising in her throat. Velith muttered, "We should kill it now, destroy the vault, burn it." The demon chuckled, watching him with eyes of roiling fire. "You cannot kill what feeds on the killing. I am not your enemy, assassin. I am a herald, a witness. When your cities burn, when your gods are bones, I will still be here, watching, smiling." The runes flickered again, then dimmed, as if some greater force pressed down upon them. The demon's form spasmed, and for a brief moment it screamed, not in malice, but in fear. It looked at Xyrissa, and in that instant all its mocking joy vanished. "You must choose," it whispered, voice cracked and bleeding. "Seal it again, or feed it. There is no third path." The vault shuddered, and far beneath them, from a depth beyond stone and time, came a sound. Breathing, slow, heavy, awake. Xyrissa turned away from the cage. Her sisters gathered close, eyes wide with horror. Velith said nothing, but his face was pale beneath the mask. She stared into the darkness ahead, down the corridor that led deeper into the hollow. The Devourer was waking, and it knew her name. Chapter 10. Return to Nagrivhar. The wind howled like mourning spirits as the black gates of Nagrivhar loomed into view, jagged spires slicing the sky, their iron teeth silhouetted against a bleeding dusk. The clouds above churned like diseased lungs, bruised purple and bile yellow, unnatural even for this cursed land. The mountain shadows that once offered shelter now seemed to lean inward, clutching the city like claws made of dusk and despair. Xyrissa walked ahead of her broken procession, her blood-caked robes clinging to her gaunt frame like funeral wrappings. The silver veil she wore no longer gleamed. It had dulled, mottled with flecks of dried ichor and soot. Her hands bore deep cuts, scabbed over with dark resin. Her eyes, those fever-bright orbs behind the mask, saw no longer the world as it was, but the world as it would be. Behind her marched only 5 sisters of the bleeding veil, their blades dulled, their masks cracked. Where once they had chanted with zeal, now they whispered only prayers of silence. Velith brought up the rear, limping slightly, a blackened bandage wrapped around his shoulder where the thing from the vault had touched him. The mark beneath had not healed. It pulsed with a slow, malignant light. They passed beneath the gate without challenge. No guards halted them. No questions were barked. Even the executioners, normally silent but alert, stood unmoving, as if something had taken root in their stillness, as if they, too, had heard the hollow scream. The Temple of Cain awaited them. Its towers were slick with rain, the stones sweating crimson. The cauldron's great fires burned low, casting sputtering light across the blood-slick courtyards. And within the sanctum, the whispers had grown bolder. Xyrissa entered the grand hall, where the pillars were shaped like flayed bodies bound in eternal ecstasy. The air was thick with incense and old blood, with the murmur of sibilant prayers. The other Hag Queens were already gathered, perched upon their bone thrones like vultures in finery. Their eyes glittered with suspicion, with hunger. High Priestess Velar sat at the apex, her gold-laced robes falling in perfect folds over her chair of fused skulls. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers drummed softly against the bone armrest, an endless, patient beat of judgment. "Xyrissa the Veiled returns," Velar intoned, voice smooth as oil, loud enough to silence the hall. "But what does she bring? Victory? Enlightenment? Or madness?" Xyrissa stepped forward. The blood on her boots left sticky prints across the sanctified floor. "I bring truth," she said, her voice low but clear, cracking with strain. The hollow has spoken, the vault is real, the demon still bound, but the seal fails. The court erupted, laughter, scoffs, hisses of disbelief. One hag spat onto the floor, another, old and cruel-eyed, rose with a sneer. "Lies," she barked. "Tales told by broken minds. You seek power through fear, veiled one." "Blasphemy," another hissed. "The gods punish her with visions, and she dares call them prophecy." Xyrissa's jaw clenched. She stepped forward, pulling her dagger from her belt. Without hesitation, she dragged the edge across her palm, letting the blood drip onto the stone floor. "I saw the Devourer below," she growled. "A god thing beyond name, beneath comprehension. It stirs beneath our feet. It drinks our faith like wine. Already the blood refuses to boil in the cauldron. Already the prayers ring hollow." "You presume to lecture us on faith?" Velar asked, rising slowly. Her shadow fell across the floor like a blade. "You return broken, cloaked in the stench of heresy, and expect obedience?" Xyrissa raised her hand, and from her pouch drew forth the shard of obsidian marked with the vault's runes. Even in the dim torchlight it pulsed red, alive. "I bring proof," she snarled. "Runes older than Ulthuan, markings of the vault. The demons spoke of your fear, of your gods, of Cain dying." Gasps rippled through the court. Vainly Velar moved. In a flash of motion, she descended from her throne, her blade in hand, morn whisper, forged from the melted blades of slain acolytes. It sang through the air, slicing toward Xyrissa's throat. Valeth moved faster. He appeared from the shadows like smoke, catching Velar's blade with both daggers, sparks leaping from the impact. His knees buckled from the force, but he held firm. "Touch her," he growled, "and you doom us all." The room froze. Velar glared at him with open hatred. "You dare raise steel in the court of blades?" "I dare survive," he said, eyes never leaving hers. Xyrissa stepped between them. "If you strike me down, then who will tell you how to seal the hollow? Who among you will bleed into the stone to quiet the Devourer's breath?" Silence. Then, slowly, Velha withdrew. The other hags shifted, muttered, eyes sharp with calculation. Finally Velar turned, walking back to her throne. "Very well," she said coldly. "You shall have your time. One blood moon. Show us this vault. Show us this devourer, or die by your own blade." Xyrissa bowed slightly, concealing the shudder that ran through her bones. The battle was not won, only delayed, but she had breached the first wall of disbelief, and behind it the darkness smiled. Chapter 11. Trial of Heresy. The Court of Blades gathered beneath a storm-dark sky, the heavens boiling with bruise-colored clouds that spat ash instead of rain. Lightning cracked above the Temple of Cain, illuminating the jagged terraces and bone-laced battlements with pale flickering fire. The stone floor of the arena was slick with old blood, thousands of layers deep, forming a hardened crust of sacrifice beneath the feet of those who now came to witness judgment. 1,000 eyes watched from the tiered balconies above. Witch-elves, hag queens, executioners, nobles wrapped in crimson silks and lacquered black armor, all eager for spectacle, all thirsty for blood. This was not justice. This was tradition, and tradition demanded that the accused suffer before the gods. At the center stood Xyrissa, her silver mask dull, her veil cut short. Her robes had been stripped to ceremonial tatters, bare arms marked with fresh cuts, each one inscribed with runes of binding, truth, and pain. She bore no weapon. Her blades had been taken. Her only arms were those given by Cain, flesh, rage, and will. High above, Velha loomed from her throne, her black gold regalia gleaming like a vulture's talons in the stormlight. A cruel smile played upon her lips. "Sister Xyrissa," she intoned, her voice booming across the killing floor. "You stand accused of heresy, of consorting with forbidden entities, of defiling the sacred rites of Cain with false visions and stolen names. Do you deny it?" Xyrissa stood firm, her voice calm but edged with venom. "I speak only what I have seen. What you choose to name heresy is the truth your cowardice cannot bear." Gasps echoed from the balconies. Valar's smile widened. "Then let Cain be your judge." With a motion of her hand, the floor before Xyrissa split. The stone parted with a sound like a bone snapped at the joint, revealing a pit of steaming darkness. From within rose a thing, towering, grotesque, armored in fused flesh and iron. It had once been a dark elf, perhaps, but now its body was warped beyond recognition. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks, each hand ending in hooked blades. Its face was hidden behind a helm of skulls, fused to the flesh with barbed wire, its eyes nothing but glowing slits of hate. "The champion of Cain," Valar announced. "Born in torment, fed on traitors, it knows only judgment, and judgment will be delivered by blood." The champion roared, a deafening, low-frequency growl that rattled the bones of every spectator. It stomped forward, dragging a cleaver the size of a coffin behind it. A sister of the court approached Xyrissa, offering her a single weapon, a ritual dagger, curved and black, forged from obsidian kissed by lightning. She took it with a steady hand. The gong sounded once. The duel began. The champion moved first, fast, impossibly fast for its size. Its cleaver sang through the air with the sound of a guillotine. Xyrissa dove, rolling beneath the swing, the blade missing her head by inches and carving a trench into the arena floor. She came up behind it, slashing her dagger across its calf. Blood sprayed, boiling, black and fetid. The beast didn't flinch. It spun and backhanded her with a blow that launched her across the floor. She hit the wall with a sickening crunch, her ribs cracking. Blood poured from her mouth, but she forced herself up, spitting teeth into the dust. The crowd roared. The champion came again, this time swinging both arms in a cross slash. Xyrissa barely ducked, feeling the wind of its strike tear strands from her veil. She plunged the dagger into its side, but the blade stuck in bone. The champion screamed and grabbed her by the throat, lifting her into the air. Her vision dimmed. Then she bit. She tore a chunk from its forearm with her teeth, spitting the foul meat into its eyes. It howled, releasing her. She dropped, landed hard, rolled. With her dagger gone, she reached into the wound she had opened and ripped. Her hand came away with something pulsing, some blackened organ fused with bone and wire. The champion staggered, howling, but did not fall. Xyrissa screamed her own war cry and drove the organ into its gaping mouth. There was a snap, then an explosion of rot and bile as the thing's head burst, the helm and skull beneath shredded from within. It dropped to its knees, gurgling, before collapsing face first into the blood-soaked stone. Silence. Then thunder. The court erupted in cries, some of awe, others of rage. Velhar rose, her expression unreadable. "Cain has spoken." Xyrissa stood, blood pouring from her nose, her side, her split scalp. Her hands trembled, her skin pale and slick. But she did not fall. She turned her gaze upward, meeting Velhar's eyes, and smiled, just slightly. For now, the god of murder had stayed his hand. But even he knew what slept beneath. Chapter 12. The Broken Cauldron. The great cauldron of blood had not been silent in over a millennium. Carved from a single slab of obsidian pulled from the heart of a murdered mountain, veined with molten iron and etched with the names of 10,000 sacrifices, the cauldron stood taller than 3 druki and wider than a war chariot. It pulsed with a dull red glow, a heart of faith and fear. For centuries it had boiled with the blood of the worthy and the condemned, singing with divine heat as Cain's will manifested in every scream, every crimson bubble, every rising wail of the dying. Until today. Today it cracked. Xyrissa stood at the center of the high temple, her flesh wrapped in sacred bindings, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and triumph. Around her stood the gathered priesthood, masked in ceremonial gold, their hands slick with sacrificial gore. Velhar herself presided above from her obsidian dais, her face impassive, the trial of heresy still fresh in memory. The rite had begun, as all others. The slave, a noble taken for treachery, had been bound to the horned altar and opened from throat to navel with a single, precise stroke. Her blood, rich and steaming, had been funneled into the cauldron through iron channels shaped like serpents. The chamber echoed with the chants of the witch elves, the dance of blades and tongues already spinning into ecstasy. But the cauldron did not boil. Not this time. It trembled. Xyrissa stepped forward, eyes wide behind her silver mask. The surface of the blood remained eerily still, mirror-like, save for the occasional ripple, as if something stirred beneath it. A smell rose from it, not the sweet coppery tang of fresh blood, but something wrong, something musty, fungal, ancient, like soil turned under after too many years of rot. Then the tremor came again. The cauldron heaved, a dull crack echoing across the stone floor. The temple froze. Every eye turned toward the cauldron as a jagged line spread across its base, fine as a hair at first, but growing wider with every heartbeat. The iron snakes trembled, their mouths leaking thick black sludge. The glyphs along the cauldron's rim pulsed wildly, flaring green, then dimming, then screaming, not audibly, but in the minds of all present. A chorus of despair and betrayal, a howl of the divine fracturing. Then it split. A rending sound, like 1,000 necks snapping at once. The cauldron cracked open, spewing forth not blood, but a black vapor that slithered into the air like smoke from a god's funeral pyre. The floor quaked, the statues of Cain shattered in unison, faces breaking into jagged shards, eyes gouged clean. A fissure opened beneath the altar, swallowing the slave's ruined body whole. Screams erupted from the acolytes. Velhar rose, eyes wide, shouting prayers of binding, her voice trembling. "This is a test, a sign. Hold your faith, sisters." But already the temple fractured. Half the priesthood fell to their knees in fervent prayer. The rest fled, blades clattering against stone, robes flying, panic breaking centuries of discipline. The screams turned from ritual ecstasy to raw, primal terror. Xyrissa did not move. She stepped to the edge of the cracked cauldron, knelt, and dipped her hand into the still warm blood. It was cold, and in its surface she saw not her reflection, but an eye, vast, pupilless, watching. The Devourer Below had tasted the cauldron, and it was not sated. The riots began by nightfall. Nagrivhar's streets choked with chaos. The faithful accused one another of sacrilege. Fanatics proclaimed the death of Cain, turning on their neighbors with flensing knives and broken icons. The weak and the wounded were torn apart in the plazas. Cauldrons across lesser temples boiled dry or vomited bile instead of blood. The executioners tried to impose order but were overwhelmed, dragged into alleys and butchered in the name of new gods with no name. Hunger swept the city, not for food, but for meaning. The nobles barricaded their spires, only to find their slaves had already slit their children's throats and opened their own bellies in mock sacrifice. Entire districts burned with witch fire. The screams from the docks did not stop for 2 full days. In the temple, Velhar convened her last council. Only 5 hags remained, faces pale behind their masks. "What have you done, Xyrissa?" Velhar hissed, her voice ragged. "You've broken the faith. You've unbound the god." "No, Xyrissa said quietly. He was already unbound. We just noticed too late. Velith appeared beside her, blood on his sleeves, his dagger red to the hilt. "The vault pulses," he whispered. "The demon stirs. The hollow breathes." Velhar rose, trembling. "Then we seal it. With blood, with fire. We bury it again." Xyrissa turned her gaze to her, mask glinting with the last flickers of torchlight. "We can't. You don't seal the Devourer. You only choose how it eats." And the cauldron behind them gurgled with laughter. Chapter 13. Blades and Faith. The screams of Nagrivhar became a hymn of madness. Smoke bled from every spire, thick and red-tinged, as if the city itself was exhaling blood. Towers once sacred to Cain burned in violet flame, their statues melting into rivers of molten devotion. The air reeked of charred flesh and boiling fat, pierced by the howls of the dying and the damned. Black ash fell like snow, coating every cobblestone, every blade, every mask. Civil war had erupted, not between noble houses, but within the very heart of the temple. On one side stood the Old Faithful, led by Velhar and her dwindling circle of purists. They clung to the remnants of tradition with bloodied hands, praying to a god who no longer answered, slaying anyone who dared whisper of change. On the other stood Xyrissa. Her followers were few but fanatical, witches, assassins, executioners, and orphans of the cracked cauldron, drawn not by hope but by desperation. They had seen the omens, heard the vault's whispers, watched the blood curdle before their eyes. They were no longer just priests or soldiers. They were believers, in the end. In the lowest sanctum of the shattered temple, beneath the ruined effigy of Cain, Xyrissa gathered them. The chamber was lit by dying braziers and the glow of blood runes pulsing across the cracked stone floor. She stood barefoot in the pooling gore of a dozen fresh sacrifices, traitor acolytes who had tried to flee. Their heads now crowned the black altar, eyes plucked, tongues nailed to their foreheads. Her veil was gone. Her face was exposed, pale, gaunt, painted with a spiral of red carved into her own flesh. Her silver eyes gleamed like twin shards of prophecy. "We cannot win this city," she said, voice hoarse but steady, "but we can deny the Devourer its birth." The crowd murmured. Blades were lifted. One sister dropped to her knees, pressing her forehead into the bloodied floor in silent oath. Velith stepped forward, his armor scorched, one hand clutching a cracked rib. "The vault still holds, but barely. The demon within sings. The walls bleed. We must reach it before the others do." "Velhar won't allow that," hissed a young witch with scarred cheeks. "She's bound the remaining executioners to her will. They hunt anyone who carries your mark." "Then we bleed our way through," Xyrissa said. "We carve a path with steel and conviction. We bury the vault in its own screaming bones, and if we die—" She drew her dagger and cut deep across her palm, letting the blood spatter across the altar. "Then we die with meaning." They moved at dusk. Their path through the city was paved in corpses. The streets of Nagrivhar had become a battlefield. Sister turned on sister. Altar brothers dueling in the ruins of temples with icon blades and serrated spears. Children were used as bait, their laughter echoing hollowly through alleys before arrows found throats. Poison fountains erupted into gouts of fire. Beasts released from the pits ran rampant, eviscerating anything that moved. Xyrissa led from the front. Her dagger became a scythe, slicing through armor and bone, her face expressionless as she slit the throats of her own kin. One high priestess tried to parley, kneeling in supplication. Xyrissa opened her belly with a single cut, then shoved her still-writhing entrails into her mouth. "There is no more parley," she whispered. Velith was her shadow, his twin blades singing through the chaos. He moved like a ghost, appearing only to kill. He tore through Velhar's personal guards with precision, painting the walls in arterial arcs. At one point, 3 executioners cornered him in a plaza of shattered idols. He took 2 in the eye. The third begged for mercy. Velith broke his knees, then let the mob devour him. By the time they reached the edge of the hollow, only 20 remained. 20 against a city. But the vault pulsed before them, its walls now open, its seals bleeding glyphs into the earth. The daemon within thrashed against its bindings, screaming not with words but with emotion, madness, ecstasy. The devourer was stirring. The sky above twisted as the veil weakened. Stars blinked out, the clouds turned red. The earth groaned with the weight of awakening hunger. Behind them, Velhar's army advanced, hundreds of zealots clad in crimson and gold, chanting the death prayers of Cain, unwilling to see the truth. They came like a tide, blades drawn, voices raised in fury. Xyrissa turned to her remaining sisters. "This is not a war," she said, eyes glowing with inner fire. "This is a knife to the throat of fate." And with a cry that shattered the last silence of Nagrivhar, they charged into the hollow, into the vault, into the jaws of a sleeping god. Chapter 14, Sacrifice of the Veiled. The vault screamed. It howled through stone and soul alike, a ceaseless dirge of blood and entropy. The glyph-bound walls, once dormant and orderly, now surged with frenetic life. The runes bled from the seams in rivers of molten gold, spiraling up the obsidian columns and across the vaulted ceiling in a lattice of decaying magic. Cracks split the floor, vomiting steam and whispers, voices of the dead, voices unborn, voices that had never had the right to speak. Xyrissa stood at the center, her arms outstretched, palms split wide, blood flowing down her fingers like ribbons. Her breath was shallow. Her heart thrummed against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her eyes, silver and filled with finality, did not waver. Behind her, her remaining sisters formed a loose circle, warding off the encroaching tide of Velhar's forces as the vault's threshold shimmered with the presence of the Devourer. It was coming, not in shape or form, but in essence. The space inside the vault pulsed with impossible weight, the pressure of belief dying and being reborn as hunger. Every breath tasted of iron and despair. The demon within its runic prison roared now without joy, its many forms unraveling under the gravity of its master's arrival. Velith staggered to Xyrissa's side, blood streaming from a gash above his brow, one arm limp and soaked in black. He had killed a dozen, maybe more, to get here, to buy these last breaths of time. "You're not strong enough to contain it," he rasped. "None of us are." "No," she replied, voice like broken glass. "But I don't need to contain it. I need to bind it." She looked up toward the highest point of the chamber, where the ancient seal still hovered above the vault like a shroud of ghostlight. It was old elven magic, pure and terrible, older than the sundering, older than the gods themselves. It shimmered with threads of truth so sharp they could carve time, pulsing with the rhythm of laws unspoken since the first flame was kindled. To use it meant becoming part of it. It meant ceasing to be. Her fingers clenched around the obsidian shard marked with the vault's key glyph, the fragment they had carried from the hollow. It pulsed in her hand like a second heart, eager, ravenous. It demanded a price. The demon turned toward her, its forms collapsing into a single, awful visage, her own face, flayed and smiling. "You understand now," it whispered, "what must be paid. This is no act of salvation. This is a burial alive, a soul flaying. You will scream for eternity, caged in law, unchanging, unliving." Xyrissa stepped toward the dais, ignoring the pain in her limbs, the failing in her lungs. "I was born in sacrifice," she said, "raised in slaughter. I served a god who only took. Now I give." Velith reached for her, but she was already ascending the steps. "You'll die," he croaked. "No," she said, looking back with the ghost of a smile. "I'll aid." She reached the seal and raised the shard. The glyphs flared to blinding brightness. A wind rose, impossible and soundless, lifting her hair, her robes, as the air tore around her like an unraveling soul. And she spoke the word. It wasn't in any tongue of mortals or gods, but in the language of essence, of eternity, a scream locked in crystalline clarity. The vault shrieked. The demon screamed, pulled backward as the rune seal descended, lashing out with claws that tore time, with mouths that vomited entropy. It wrapped around Xyrissa, tendrils of hunger trying to burrow into her heart, her memories, herself. And still, she spoke. One by one, her bones glowed beneath her skin. Her blood turned to gold. Her flesh peeled away, not in pain, but in transmutation, as her body became the conduit of the old magic. Her screams became light. Her soul burst like a star, thread by thread weaving into the collapsing glyphs. The demon was dragged back, bound in word and will. The vault sealed. With a final thunderclap, the light died. Silence fell. Velith stumbled forward, but where Xyrissa had stood was only ash and a single glyph scorched into the obsidian, a spiral of sacrifice. Outside the vault, the battle ended not with a cry of victory, but with stunned, breathless silence. Felhar fell to her knees, her voice gone, her eyes empty. The blood-stained sky stilled, the fires shrank, and the city of Nagrivhar wept for its savior, its heretic, its last believer. Xyrissa the Veiled was no more. But in the roots of the world, where the Devourer writhed in chains of soul and silence, her scream still echoed, not in fear, but in defiance. Chapter 15. Ashes and Whispers. The sky above Nagrivhar was quiet. No longer did it bleed storms or cry ash upon the spires. The sun did not shine, it never had, but even the gloom felt changed, subdued, as if the sky itself were holding its breath in the wake of something vast and forgotten, sliding back into slumber. The winds no longer carried screams, but only the soft, bitter scent of burned flesh and temple incense long since gone cold. The city stood, barely. Whole districts lay in ruin, their towers shattered, streets littered with the scorched bones of priestesses and zealots. Statues of Cain had toppled, their stone faces cracked, eyes gouged as if in mourning. Blackened blood stained the walls in wide arcs, dried mid-scream. Entire temples had been gutted, their cauldrons overturned and silent, their fires extinguished. The great ziggurat of the Temple of Cain now leaned slightly to one side. Its upper tiers collapsed in a landslide of sanctified rubble. But amid the ruin, life lingered. Witch-elves, their veils tattered, wandered the remains in silence, blades sheathed, faces bare. Some carried the bodies of the fallen, laying them upon pyres built from broken icons and shattered altars. Others painted the glyphs of mourning across the black stone walls, not in reverence to Cain, but to her, Xyrissa, the Veiled One, the prophet. Her name had become a whisper, a soft, almost reverent breath passed between surviving acolytes and orphaned sisters. It was spoken not as a prayer, but as a memory, laced with guilt and awe. Not all believed. Some still called her heretic. Others spat at her name, saying she had led the faithful into darkness and abandoned their God. But they were fewer now, and they were silent when the ground no longer trembled. At the edge of the hollow, where once the vault pulsed with the Devourer's hunger, there was only black glass. A perfect obsidian seal had formed over the rent in the earth, its surface smooth and cool, etched with a single glyph, an elegant spiral of interwoven runes, delicate and razor-sharp, glowing faintly with a soft inner fire. No priest could decipher its meaning, but all knew who had left it. Velith knelt before the seal, his cloak torn, his armor rusted and cracked. One arm was bound in linen, the mark beneath still glowing faintly with sickly light. He had not spoken in days, not since he had watched her vanish into light and pain, not since he had heard her scream, a scream not of agony, but of absolute will, as the vault sealed behind her. He placed his daggers upon the seal and bowed his head. "She gave her soul," he whispered, voice cracked, "and bought silence with herself." Behind him, the surviving sisters knelt as well, some weeping, others expressionless, all facing the glyph as if it were an altar. And in the silence, the hollow breathed no more. Weeks passed. Nagrivhar began to rebuild, cautiously, without celebration. Faith did not return in full. The rituals were quieter, the blood less fevered. Cain's name was still spoken, but with hesitation, as though the god might notice and demand proof of loyalty anew. The new hags did not claim visions. They did not promise omens. They enforced law, not belief. But always, always, there was a shrine. Not large, just a stone recess near the vault. Within it, a single mask sat, a silver veil, cracked and scorched, resting atop a bundle of dried, bloodied robes. No name adorned it, no statue marked it, only the spiral above, carved again in fresh stone, glowing faintly in the dark. And beneath it, written by an unknown hand in the old script of Nagari, was a single phrase. She screamed where others knelt. Xyrissa was gone, but the Devourer slept, and Nagrivhar, though bloodied and bruised, still stood. In a world where gods devoured and faith turned to rot, that was victory enough.